Hello everyone, welcome to Code's first ever virtual guest speakers event. Remember that this is only day one of our 3-day event and that there will be a similar event like this tomorrow and on Sunday. Before we get started, let's talk about us a little bit. Code. So what exactly is Code? Well, it's a high school student-led nonprofit in New York, primarily aiming to diversify and increase student tech engagement and expand computer science education around the entire nation. One way we do this is by hosting large events such as this, because not only does it help us fulfill our mission, but it helps students who are interested in programming such as you all increase and expand your skill and knowledge about this field. Well, that's enough about us. Now it's time to introduce our first guest speaker today. We hope that you all are able to enjoy this event and get something away from it. Take it away.
With that being said, it is our great pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker. She grew up in Houston, Texas, and moved to New York City to fulfill her role as a software engineer on the Apple podcast team. She's also an NYU graduate, and in fact, a Brooklyn Tech alum. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ms. Nanako Chung.
Hi everyone, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Code, for having me. Hopefully people can see this. And please feel free to stop me if you can't. So as the introduction has said, I am Nanako. I am going to talk to you all today about what I think it takes to become a software engineer, given my experience thus far and my journey to get to where I am today. So to establish some credibility, my current role is a software engineer on the Apple Podcast team. I am on the server side of things, so I work on backend related technologies, and I work specifically on the Podcast Connect account setup and uploading of MP3 files for podcast creators. And eventually it gets to the part on the left where you can, you open up the podcast app and you see all these podcasts and these episodes that you can listen to on the day-to-day. But I work on the flip side of that. So I help creators upload content on their Podcast Connect account. But most importantly, I wanted to talk to you today about how I got here, because it was not easy by any means. And I'm sure that you all are interested in hearing the path in becoming a software engineer. So just to recap, I am a Japanese Korean female from Houston. And just as a quick correction, I didn't grow up in Houston, but I was born there and I lived there for the first few years of my life. Until my parents got divorced, and then I moved here when I was about 4, and here meaning New York City. So I've been here since. I consider myself to be a New Yorker. And as aforementioned, I graduated from Brooklyn Technical High School in June 2016, where I studied law and society and really found my passion for logical reasoning. I didn't know it at the time because I hadn't been exposed to coding at all pretty much in high school. But I think the thing I liked about law and computer science in general was that I was always learning and always trying to apply logical thinking to almost every aspect of my life, but realizing that, there are definitely gray areas, and it always, pushed me to challenge myself. And so in my last class of high school, in my Calculus BC class, I took my teacher assigned us a Python project, and I had never touched code before. And that was the first experience I ever had with coding. It was really scary and quite frustrating, to be honest. I didn't know what I was doing more than half the time, and I was always asking for help, and it kind of helped me learn to humble myself. And it was a really great experience and kind of sparked my interest for computer science and programming in general. So I went on to NYU. I studied at the College of Arts and Science, so not the engineering school, but both schools offer a computer science major. They just have different curriculums. So I studied computer science and I learned how to code. There, I got really meaningful work experience through my network and learning how to interview, as well as just studying the art of problem solving in general. Most importantly, I think I created really meaningful connections at NYU through mentorship, peers, and through this conference that I attended called Grace Hopper. It's a huge women in tech conference for those of you who haven't heard of it. And unfortunately, I did graduate in the pandemic, so it was in May 2020. The pictures on the left, if you're wondering, are the virtual reality celebrations that my friends and I attended, that NYU put together, since graduating in the pandemic was, it was quite lonely, but we made it work and they made it work for us. So it's pretty cool what the power of technology can do to make us feel more together during tough times like this. But I think on top of everything, I learned a lot about being a software engineer even before I actually became a software engineer through my college experience. The two most important things I would say are learning new things and also unlearning old things. So I'm going to get into the learning aspect of everything now. So I think learning is incredibly important no matter what you are pursuing. Learning implies a sense of curiosity and interest in what you're studying or trying to pursue. And at the end of the day, I think this is the most important thing, and it kind of ties you to your career. And if you're not learning, it means that you are kind of outgrowing a space. And so with tech, I think it's beautiful because I never find myself not learning anything. I learn something new every day on the job. I learn something new every day at work, at like when I was working in college. And of course, I learned something new every day in my classes. So with that, I thought I would break up the learning that I did over the course of my journey as a software engineer and in college into two separate parts. So what I've learned regarding tech and what I've learned regarding mindset. So in terms of tech, I really got to explore what computers actually do for us. The social impact of computers is just now becoming this huge boom, especially with The Social Dilemma, which is a documentary on Netflix that came out about social media that I highly recommend, and a bunch of other documentaries that are alike. There's just so much research being done on the social impacts of technology, and I think it's quite fascinating to watch as someone who grew up not having my own computer, and then now having just multiple ways to access the internet and having a phone that's basically a computer all the time. So yeah, I think it's been fascinating to learn about all of the things that computers do for us. And second, I think this is what you all might be really interested in learning about, but the actual process of learning how to code for me, I guess you can say it started or launched in high school when I was assigned that Python class in my Python project in my calculus class. It was extremely frustrating and hard because I didn't know what I was doing and there was no proper guidance. It was more of like an autonomous project. And so I think the actual process of learning how to code for me came in college. And I think it happens differently for everyone because I'll address my privilege of having gone to college and been able to learn that way, but some people don't get it the same way, and that's totally fine. I think the process of learning how to code it's just supposed to be about learning how you work as an individual, but also learning how you collaborate with other people and bring ideas together and implement them. So I like to think of coding in two separate steps. So coming up with the actual solution, verbalizing it, communicating with your teammates, yourself even, because sometimes it doesn't make sense if you just jump straight into code. And then of course the second part is actually writing the code. And so I think the process of learning how to find your solution and how you best work in both cases, like how you best work when you're verbalizing a solution and coming up with one, as well as how you best work when you're coding. Like some people like to hole up and stay in a room and code for all hours of the night in order to get what they have to get done. I'm more of like a morning person, so I will get all of my sleep because I think that's extremely important to coding clearly, and then pursue what I have to do. But it's different for everyone. And of course, like the resources you have access to, as I was mentioning before, are different for everyone. And I think with the internet, thankfully, it's become a lot more accessible. So you definitely don't need to know, you don't need to learn computer science in school or have a formal education in order to learn it. The third thing is knowing when to ask for help and when to work independently. This is something I still struggle with every day, so don't feel bad at all if you can't get it right off of the bat. But this is probably one of the most important things I've learned regarding learning how to write good code and efficiently writing good code, because you could spend hours thinking about something and wondering how to do this very specific part of the problem, even though you have an overall general solution on how you know how to implement it, you know how to do it. You're just stuck on this one thing. I find that that's the best time to ask for help. If there's just a little blocker that you know can get easily unblocked, that's probably the best time to ask for help. But coming up with a solution is probably best to do on your own, because then you get that algorithmic practice of knowing how to problem solve, knowing how to think logically through a bunch of like edge cases or constraints that you might have when given a project. And I think that's really challenging, but probably my favorite part of the job. So, and the last thing, I personally think the best coders are self-reflective. You have to always question yourself and your abilities and your skills to know how to write good code. And I say that because you have to always ask yourself, am I doing this most efficiently? Am I doing this in the best way possible for, like, considering the resources that I have right now in my grasp? Am I communicating my work to my teammates well? Because we're all working on this code together. It's not just me. And that takes a lot of self-reflection. So if, there's that classic stereotype of coders being coding monkeys and they stay in their room all the time and don't really talk to people. I think, it's true to an extent, but I think it's more important to sometimes step away from code and think back on, how well you're doing, how do you think you can improve? So the second part is what I've learned regarding mindset. I think this is just as important as what I've learned regarding tech. So I thought I would share it with you all. I mentioned this before, but I think the power of connecting with people and learning from others has done amazing things for me. I have met so many mentors and inspirational people from asking for help and trying my best to connect with people who, are maybe like me, well, at least when I was in college, and a little bit doubtful of my skills and my abilities. I found communities that way. I think just the power of people and what they already know and teaching that to you is just invaluable. And the second point is kind of piggybacking off of that. I discovered in college that I do have this love of giving back to people. Like, my relationships and my connections with people never feel complete unless I'm giving back to them. And so for my mentors, it's been really good for me because they have watched me become mentors for other people. And in that way, like, it's just amazing what this chain of giving can do for others and yourself. So I would keep that in mind, because I think that makes you a good software engineer, definitely, but also it just helps other people be more encouraged and less scared of joining the tech industry, because it is really intimidating at first. The third thing is the power of manifesting. I think in 2020, we've all had a really difficult year. But the thing that got me through was this power of manifesting and believing that I was able to do what I'm doing now. And this quote comes from a really cool video that I watched on Instagram with Alicia Keys. She was interviewing an author about a book about women's mindsets. And the woman mentioned this quote, "Bless the largeness in me, even when I fear it." And I think it's just such a beautiful quote. And it reminds me of another quote I heard from Grace Hopper, which is, great people do great things before they're ready. So I think both those quotes say the same thing, essentially believing in yourself and making sure that you know that even if you don't have the skills now, you will, and you can totally get those skills at some point is really important. And the last thing is be curious, aware, and adaptable. So like I mentioned previously, I think the best software engineers are self-aware and reflective. And so making sure that you're always catching yourself when you feel like you're not doing a great job, asking for feedback from your managers or your peers or your teachers even. I think that's always a good thing to do. And making sure that you stay open to opportunities, as well as like listening to change. So change is something that always happens in tech. So keeping up to date with everything, but also making sure that, you are flexible in terms of like project constraints. And when your managers tell you to do something differently, you should be quick on your feet and ready to make that change. So the second part of being a really good software engineer is unlearning. So unlearning to me means questioning everything around you and unraveling those truths behind truths and recognizing that what has been instilled in you systemically might not always be true. And sometimes it even holds you back from progressing in your career, in your life. And I think it's equally as important as learning new things. So again, I split this up into what I've unlearned regarding tech and what I've unlearned regarding mindset. So what I've unlearned regarding tech, you have to fit stereotypes of a software engineer to be a good software engineer. That's not true. I think that there are a lot of stereotypes for software engineers specifically, such as they have to be gamers and, they have to sit in a coding monkey stereotype that I mentioned earlier, where you're sitting in a room all day and like not socializing with people. I think there's a bunch of stereotypes, both physically and mentally, that I think software engineers have that you do not have to fit in order to be a good software engineer. With that said, I'd like to mention the statistic that 25% of women, 25% of software engineers are women. And I think it's okay to walk into a room and not look like the people around you, recognize that, and still have the ability to be a good software engineer, because obviously that doesn't affect your abilities or capabilities in any way. So just remembering that when you walk into a room of people where you look different and you feel different, whatever that may mean to you, I think it's really important. So yeah. And the second thing is that mobility and turnover is discouraged. That is definitely not true. I have seen so much mobility and turnover in my previous internships. My other coworkers from previous internships have already left their jobs, and I've only, I was there 2 years ago, and I just, I'm seeing another coworker at work who's leaving. It's only after 8 months. And I think, people make decisions for different reasons. And fortunately, it's encouraged in tech to try new things and continue entering spaces that challenge you and help you learn and grow as a software engineer. And it's encouraged that you chase whatever helps you grow in this field, from what I've seen. So don't be afraid of not getting the first dream job out of college, because that's not, you can move to your dream job if you want to. You just have to keep working, and it's encouraged for you to do what you want. The third thing is that creativity doesn't play a role in software development. It definitely does. I have so many creative people on my team who work on UI, which is basically designing how a website is built to best accommodate the user who's using it. And on top of just website building, there's a whole bunch of like infrastructure design, system design related planning that needs to be a part of the software development process. And creativity is so important in all of that, because you have to consider all of these different factors and constraints that are required to build the system in the best way possible. And so I would just keep in mind for the creative folks out there that it does definitely play a role in software development. And there's also this huge boom in the gaming industry now that requires so much creativity as a software engineer. And so I would encourage you to try it if that's something you're interested in doing, even if you come from a creative background or a background that's non-STEM. The next misconception is that you have to write good code or perfect code to join the industry. I can tell you that I was definitely not writing perfect code or good code even in my first few years of college. They say that it takes 10,000 hours of you to practice something in order to be really good at it or almost perfect. I don't even think I've hit that 10,000 mark yet. So I really encourage you to try to take as many opportunities as possible to code. And whether that means internships or doing more projects or starting a side project with your friends, whatever that may mean to you, I think it's important to recognize that you don't have to write perfect code in order to start. So don't think that, software engineers even write perfect code. Nobody writes perfect code. The last thing is that there is a tutorial or book or model you can follow to be successful in tech. That is absolutely not true. And it goes kind of back to my first point of fitting stereotypes or believing that this is one way. There is only one way to become a software engineer, which is to go to college and then get a degree in computer science and know how to code that way, or go to a boot camp. Those things definitely help, but they're not the only way to get there. And I have another statistic for you guys. 62% of software engineers study computer science in college. So that means that 38% don't. Although that might not seem like a large number to you, that by any means does not mean that they are not as good as the 62% that do go to college. So I've personally worked with people who have dropped out of college and became software engineers, and they were probably some of the best software engineers I've ever worked with. So, just don't discourage yourself from being a part of this industry because you didn't follow a stereotype, or you read a book and it told you to do this one thing, or you saw a tutorial and it told you if you don't know how to do this, then you're not going to be a software engineer. I don't think any of those things are true. All you need is curiosity and just determination and manifestation to become a software engineer. So the last thing is what I've unlearned regarding mindset. The first thing is confrontation can and should be avoided. I think this was a really hard one for me to learn. I was an RA in college, so I learned how to be a little bit more confrontational that way. But I think this was really hard in particular because of my Asian American background. You're not supposed to ask for more. You're not supposed to just ask for things in general. It can be seen as quite disrespectful in my community. And so I think I was fortunate enough to have learned in college that confrontation shouldn't be avoided. I think it's important and part of transparency and communication to speak what's on your mind. Obviously not in a way where you're outright saying everything that comes to your mind. There's definitely a fine line you have to balance, but I think confrontation is really important, and it's a part of being a software engineer, because if you are looking at code and you see something that could be better, you should say something about it and have a conversation with the person who might have wrote it, whether it's you or somebody else. I think it's really important to be as confrontational with yourself and other people equally. The next thing is do things only when you're ready. That is not true. I already said this, but I think manifestation is a really big part of who I am and how I got to where I am. So great people do things before they're ready. So just keep that in mind. Another thing is don't take breaks. That is so not true. I was such a workaholic in college because I believed that taking breaks was a waste of time. And I thought that it prohibited me from progressing and being more and more productive. I find that taking breaks actually makes you more productive. And I can say this during the peak pandemic when I was, at the height of my job search. And at that point, I was a little bit scared that I wasn't going to find anything because all of my offers had been canceled due to the pandemic. And there was just so much pressure that I was putting on myself to continue working, even if I was tired, and continue just doing anything I can on my free time to make progress, but that's not how progress works. I think the most important thing is to take care of yourself before, you push yourself to be more productive. And a break doesn't have to mean like going off and taking a walk. It can literally just mean closing your computer for 5 minutes and taking some time away to clear your mind and coming back. I also think it's very important to do that when you're coding, because you can get very, very frustrated. And there are so many memes at work that my coworkers and I all share of just people banging their head on a table because you are just sitting at your desk for 8 hours a day and working on this one problem. And if you can't get through it, obviously it's going to lead to this, but taking a break could really help with that because it'll give you a fresh perspective when you come back. And so the next thing is that you have to be passionate about one thing your whole life. I consider myself to be a woman of many passions. I do, and I am very passionate about tech, if you couldn't tell already, but I'm also passionate about learning. I'm passionate about giving back to people. I'm passionate about there's a list of things. And I think it took a lot for me to come to terms with the fact that just because I have a career in tech, it means that it has to be my whole life forever. That is certainly not true. And I've seen it, like I've had a really fortunate example of my father, who was in business at first and then transitioned into becoming a public teacher way later in his life, like when I was 10. So seeing that really inspired me and helped me realize that you don't have to be passionate about one thing your whole life. And even though there are these systems in place like college or even Brooklyn Tech with their majors, there's a lot of pressure for you to choose one thing early and to just keep going with that. I think like life is just too short to deem yourself passionate about one thing. If you are passionate about one thing, that's awesome, but there's no pressure to be that. And lastly, there is a right and wrong way to do things. I think I've made this point before regarding tech, but right and wrong sits on a spectrum, and everything you do kind of lies in between. There's no right and wrong way, really. And if you keep telling yourself that, you kind of mold yourself into this box, and it only prohibits you from like recognizing your infinite capacity for transformation and growth. And it just helps put things into perspective a little bit more. And I think the spectrum analogy is really helpful because it's helped me put less pressure on myself when making decisions. So like, just because I think something is, if I think something is right and wrong, the decision is pretty clear. But if I want both things and they're, I don't know which one's right or wrong, I really have to ask myself, what is it that I want? And in that way, you can actually choose things that are better for you. So just keep in mind that there's a right and wrong way to do things. This is also very, very relative to tech. So, when you're making a decision about code you have to write, there's no right and wrong way. There's always going to be some sort of trade-off you have to make when writing code. And so just thinking about it in terms of like, okay, well, I have to make trade-offs either way. What is the best decision and the best solution from what the problem is, and maybe what my team wants and what I want? Those are all really important things to consider. So takeaways, I know I kind of went on an existential rant, but takeaways, if you were to learn anything from this presentation, is that learning is just as important as unlearning, and self-reflection and awareness is the key to success, as well as manifestation. I forgot to put that in there. And always seek challenge and be curious. I think those go hand in hand. Putting yourself in situations that scare you a little bit, it doesn't have to be too much, but a little bit, I think is really important. And lastly, believe in yourself, because you can totally do it. And if I'm here, you can be here. So thank you so much. Oh my gosh, let me stop sharing my screen. Okay, so I think it's Q&A time, and I am supposed to answer some questions. Okay, so I'll start with is college needed for this field? I hope that I answered this when I was speaking, but no, the answer is no. I personally went to college and took that 62% traditional route, but again, there's that 38% of software engineers who didn't go to college for computer science, and I've worked with maybe all of them in my past have not gone to college for computer science or not gone to college in general. And they have been amazing software engineers and amazing managers. So I would say no. The next question, what coding language do you prefer? Java is my baby. I have been using that since my first college class. I do like Python because it's very cushioned and there's a lot of helper methods and it's very clean in regarding syntax, but I think Java is probably my favorite language just because it's what I'm used to writing, and also I use it at work, so I see the great impact that it can have on like a massive code base. Okay, so I just said I know Java, I know Python. I did work a lot in my internships with JavaScript and React, which is part of JavaScript. I also know SQL. I think SQL is a really important language, believe it or not. I think it's worth the hype. I think it's worth taking a class in or trying to find some resources on it and online, because I can say that I still use it on my day-to-day. And I also got an internship doing data because I knew how to write in SQL a little bit. So it can get you opportunities. Okay, this is a really good question. I think the power of manifesting, not to sound cheesy, really helped me, because I just kept telling myself that, you know, at some point I'll be where I want to be. And I know that there is that potential in me to be that person. So again, bless the largeness in me, even if I am not ready to embrace it, is I think what the biggest thing that kept me motivated during these times. And hopefully you can all manifest that same energy, because everyone has it in them. It's just about whether you're embracing it or running from it, you know? So. Yes, multiple times I have. I remember this one project in school. It was in operating systems, and I was coding day and night trying to solve it. I went to office hours and I asked all of my peers for help, and I just could not get my head around it. And it was the night before, and I was coding till the sun came up, and I remember my class was a few hours away, and I just kind of put my head down in my pillow and started crying, and I was so frustrated. I look back on that experience and I'm pretty grateful that I had it, because now I can say to you all that software engineers do not know how to solve all the problems in the world. It's just, you know, a matter of being curious enough to try to pursue it. Like if I tried now to solve that project, you know, maybe I would have a different mindset and like a fresh head to go and try to solve it. But long story short, yes, that is not the only example, but that's probably the most traumatizing one. Don't worry if you can't solve it. There is a lot of ways for someone to get a job in computer science or in tech in general. I think me personally, I again took that traditional route where I studied computer science in school, but there are a multitude of resources on the internet right now for you to take advantage of. And I would say do whatever works for you. For me, a traditional school environment worked for me because that's how I best learned how to code and realized that all of these things that I just talked about in my presentation. And also I was able to form a lot of connections there. But of course, if that isn't accessible to you, I think the resources online like Leak Code and HackerRank and all of these websites that have technical questions and teach you how to code, I think are great, just as great as going to school. So I didn't answer this. I think the biggest challenge for me was walking into a room and realizing that people don't look like me, and for some reason that kind of translated into I don't really belong here, or I shouldn't be doing this. And it kind of made me doubt my abilities a little bit, and I kind of internalized the fact that I don't look like people in the industry, and projected that insecurity onto myself. I think I overcame that by creating a community of people at school, or joining communities with women at school. Or there's this one that I really recommend. It's called Rewriting the Code. It's a virtual college network of women in tech, and I've met so many great girls through that, and I've recommended it to people who are doing job search. Like a bunch of my college friends are still doing job search now, and I recommended it to them. And it's just a great online platform for girls all around the world to stay connected to each other. So I think that support system and building that up, even with people who aren't in tech, like just having a good support system and believing in yourself and having other people believe in you was really, really helpful. I think the hardest part was realizing that I had to do everything from home. I am a huge extrovert. I love people and like being in the presence of people and feeling their energy and talking to them and having short, casual conversations, like just passing by. I love that. And that was my favorite part of past internships and working in tech too. I think that made it really hard because at the end of the day, I am a coding monkey now. I just kind of sit at my desk and do what I have to do. But, and in college too, like the latter half of college, it was kind of like that for, I'm sure you can all relate to that. But I think the hardest part, software engineering related, is that you can't see all of these really cool keyboard tricks that your coworkers do that you learn over time by sitting next to them and watching how they code, to make you code faster and more efficiently. I always love those little keyboard tricks, and I'm like, wait, how did you do that? I can't do that anymore. It's just hard because I can't see how they're typing and stuff. So that was another hard part of transitioning. Yes, I had multiple internships at small startups, and they were really, really helpful in just building my technical stack. I learned JavaScript on the job pretty much. I did take a few classes in it in college, but ultimately I learned a whole nother language from working in internships. And the way that I got these internships is literally just, applying to stuff online and sending out my resume everywhere, and seeing whoever gets back to you. And then, of course, like building relationships with people who are already in the industry and asking them for their input on like how to get help with code or like seek opportunities to code. I think that was a helpful part of my job search. But yes, I did do internships, plentiful, I think maybe 4 or 5 throughout the course of college. And I also was a TA. in school. So. So I do love backend. I think I've loved it the whole, like I always knew I wanted to do backend because it's really data heavy. And I think that's something that, you know, the industry is lacking: data validation, data privacy protection. And it's hard and tedious, but I think it's really fun. And the fact that it bounces back and forth on servers, and I like the idea that when you hit an endpoint or something, you don't know where in the universe it goes. It could go to where you want it to be, but you have no idea. And the only way to do that is by testing and making sure you do that data validation, that protection, and setting up all those systems so that it behaves as you expect it to, instead of just having it go out into the wild. I think it's a really big challenge that I've always liked. However, I think full stack is really fun. I have always done full stack in my previous internships. I don't think I could ever be a front-end engineer just because I don't consider myself to be that creative or artistic. So I would definitely prefer back-end and also full stack because it's really fun because it interweaves that creative aspect with, you know, the mysterious aspect of backend where you're hitting servers and not knowing where things are going. So it's a challenge in itself because you have to deal with both. But yeah. A good first step, I'm going to imply that you're referring to becoming a software engineer. I think, I mean, everything that I said in this presentation, basically. So recognizing that there's a lot to learn and learning those things, as well as recognizing there's a lot to unlearn and unlearning those things. I think that would be a really great step. Just kind of maybe even putting it down in a journal, things that I should do or want to do as a software engineer, and what I have to learn to get there, what I have to unlearn to get there. I think those would be that would be a really great step. I definitely used LeetCode the most. I did do HackerRank at first. I was doing a lot of that during the pandemic, but I think at the end of the day, LeetCode was my buddy. And I also read a lot of Cracking the Coding interview. And I did technical interviews with my mentors, who were so gracious enough to give me their time and help me practice as much as possible before real interviews. So my degree was very useful. I'm just hesitant to say that because my degree wasn't, you know, it could have been the reason that I got the job, but, you know, people, that's not to say that people who don't have this degree cannot make it here. Again, that's one of the things that I unlearned in college because of the people that I've worked with in my internships before who have not studied computer science. So with that said, if I were to go back and change what I did in college, I probably would have studied something a little bit more, like I definitely don't regret studying computer science, but I wouldn't discourage myself or other people from studying anything that they want. Like, you know, looking back in another life, I could see myself studying history, or I can't really picture anything else besides history, but I would encourage myself to be more, you know, explore more and be more curious about other parts of me, and then study tech on the side because that's very doable. Again, you have so many resources online to be able to do that. And yeah, hopefully that answers the question. I think it's very helpful, obviously, if you do have a computer science degree, but it's not required by any means to get to the same spot. So I just applied online through their career portal, and this is actually a really important point. I did not apply to a new grad position. A new grad means, you know, fresh out of college, somebody who doesn't have as much work experience as a more senior or junior engineer. I applied to this role because it was a specific back-end position, and I was really interested in their tech stack, and I love listening to podcasts. So, it just seemed like a good fit. So I sent out my resume, was really doubtful that I was going to hear anything back, actually, because it wasn't a new grad position, but they did. And I interviewed with them 3 times. The first time it was a 30-minute phone screen with my current manager. And then the second interview, it was a 45-minute, maybe an hour-long technical debugging session with my current coworker. And then my last was a 3-hour super day, is what they call it, with the whole team. And they asked technical questions, behavioral questions, circumstantial questions, and things that they might ask you on the job, things like that. I personally didn't feel the competitiveness because it was during the pandemic, so I wasn't able to see other interviewees, and I didn't know how many people were applying for the same role. But I think the most important thing to take away from this question is, just because it doesn't say new grad doesn't mean you shouldn't apply for it. It doesn't matter if it's new grad or not. If the role interests you, you should definitely apply and put yourself out there. I'm sure I have. Honestly, I can't think of a specific example right now, unfortunately. This is a really hard question. But I would say I think I just faced a lot of backlash for myself, because I was pretty doubtful of myself when I was younger, and that's probably a result of being raised in a predominantly white neighborhood and going to predominantly white schools for a while until Brooklyn Tech. But I think putting myself in diverse environments and purposefully keeping that as a priority when I'm going forward in life, like I kept it in mind during my internships and when I was interviewing, who I was around, my friends, my communities. I think that's the most important way for me to kind of stop telling myself that backlash about just because I'm this doesn't mean I can't do this. So yeah, this was a really good question. I don't know. Hopefully that was a good answer. Oh my gosh, this is such a good question. I take breaks. I think now it's harder than ever because you're always thinking, oh my gosh, I should be on Slack, or oh my gosh, I should be on my computer doing work all the time. But I definitely do try to put in time to step away from my computer, whether it's at night or, during your lunchtime or something. Take some time to step away, close everything, get your mind out of it, refresh, and then come back to doing work. I think a morning routine for me, I know some people might not be morning people, but I am a morning person, so I'll get up early and I have a whole routine in place that keeps me really stable and stimulated. The point is, not just stability and normalcy, it's also keeping myself stimulated by reading things or listening to podcasts, or I meditate every morning, and I think that's really helped put like a fresh perspective on things. So I would say, like, do whatever works for you and listen to your body. If you feel like you are frustrated, like doing that banging your head on a wall or on your desk kind of thing, it's time for you to take a break. And recognizing that and listening to that voice when it comes and actually following it is probably the best way to avoid burnout, in my opinion. I think, besides all of the advice that I mentioned, I think just do what you love, make sure you are pursuing it because you actually like it and you're interested in logical thinking and problem solving and all of these aspects regarding computer science. I think if I was not to repeat my previous advice that I gave, It would just be to make sure that you're doing it because you actually like it, because otherwise it's hard. Everything's harder that way if you're not pursuing something you don't like. So. Honestly, I don't think I'm equipped with the knowledge to answer this question. I have barely worked with UI. I think the times that I have, I was full stack, so I still had my head 50% in backend and the other 50% was in UI. But for full stack, I would say yes. I think it's just a matter of like making sure that things are conveniently placed and correctly placed. Like you don't want a text box in the middle of your screen if that's not what you're trying to do. So in my experience, yes, but I'm not equipped to answer that question, unfortunately, sorry. So I can't answer this question either because Apple prohibits me from talking about the actual work that I do, and that's because there's a whole culture around surprise. They call it like surprise, and they want to keep their users excited about what the next thing is to come. And so, unfortunately, I can't talk about it, but I do use Java, and yeah, that's pretty much all I can say. Yeah. Right now, I just sit at the desk. It's work from home, so everyone just kind of is at their desk and is kind of on the same page. I'm sure you all can imagine as students, like you're probably doing the same thing. But again, I do have like a morning routine where I try to exercise, whether it's in the morning or at night. These days it's been at night, but I try to exercise and get myself up a little bit because otherwise I'm just sitting, the whole week. And it's important, remember to listen to your body, that's all. Yeah. Oh, I love this question. I do. I have so many. My favorite podcast is The Good Life Project. It's a Wondery podcast. It's just about, it brings a whole bunch of different people onto the podcast, like kind of low-key people, but also really great people that have done amazing things and worked as, maybe nonprofit starters, or they wrote books about things, or they experienced some sort of hardship and they want to talk about it on the podcast and how it contributed to them eventually leading to a good life. And so that's my favorite one because I don't know, I love having discussions about self-improvement and self-awareness. And so that's basically the entire podcast. The other ones I'd recommend is Ologies. I don't know if you've heard of Ologies, but it's about just random stuff, like random ology subjects. So I can't think of any examples right now, but if you look up Ologies, it's by Ali Ward. She's really fun, super curious, and it's just really entertaining to hear her ask all of these really good questions to people who are so knowledgeable about what they do. So those are the two I'd recommend. I have a lot more, but that's it. Yeah, I think the things I was talking about earlier, where I was kind of beating myself up in my head about not looking like the people in the room I walk into, or not thinking of a solution fast enough, things like that. I have definitely, those things are all imposter syndrome. And actually, I remember realizing I had imposter syndrome for the first time in ninth grade. In freshman year of college. And I reached out to my now mentor of maybe 6 years because I was experiencing it to a degree where I was like, I don't even know if I want to pursue this anymore or should. And she was so helpful in pulling me out of that rut. And so I would say, it wasn't easy for me to open up to somebody about it, especially a professional who already has experienced all of this and is where they are because they got there and they're successful and all of these things. But I would say pushing yourself to be a little bit vulnerable about it and asking for help is a really good way to combat it. Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today, and we really hope you learned something useful. On Code's behalf, we would specifically like to thank Nanako for taking time out of her day and busy schedule to make an event like this possible. It was an amazing experience, and we all loved it. Once again, thank you everyone for attending day 1 of our 3-day event. Remember, we have a similar stream like this tomorrow and on Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern, but with different speakers, different topics, and different insights. It's not too late to sign up, so do so at the link in our Instagram bio. If you have any questions, DM us on Instagram at bthscode or email us at team@techcodes.org.